Hey everyone, hopefully you're having a good day. My name's Andy. My channel's Finding Value. I'm going to go over a couple articles I was reading, get you guys caught up to speed. I would say that these articles are I'm starting to see these articles more and more. I'm starting to hear these sayings more and more. So I'm going to go over it, give you my opinion, and kind of how I would use this information. So I'm going to start with big money is eyeing metals over oil as mining assets soar. So a lot of things are going to mining. And let me read a couple of these things. It says metals are the new oil. At least this is what the article says. The energy transition is driving the next commodity super cycle, with immense prospects for technology manufacturers, energy traders, and investors. Indeed, new energy research provider Bloomberg estimates that the global transition will require $173 trillion in energy supply and infrastructure investments over the next 3 decades, with renewable energy expected to provide 85% of our energy needs by 2050. But nowhere is the outlook brighter than the metals industry. Clean energy technologies require more metals than the fossil fuel-based counterparts. The prices for copper, nickel, cobalt, and lithium could reach historic peaks for an unprecedented, sustained period in a net zero emissions scenario. The total value of production rising more than fourfold for the period of 2021 to 2040 and even rivaling the total value of crude oil production. There's a big negative for the fossil fuel sector. BNEF has forecast that electric and fuel cell vehicles will displace 21 million barrels per day in oil demand by 2050. And they better, because if we hit peak oil before 2050, they're going to have to displace more than 21 million barrels. Otherwise, we are going to have a rocketing oil price. In the net zero emission scenario, the metals demand boom could lead to a more than fourfold increase in the value of metals production, totaling 13 trillion accumulated over the next 2 decades for the 4 metals alone. This could rival the estimated value of oil production in a net zero emission scenario over that same period, making the 4 metals macro relevant for inflation, trade, and output, and provide significant windfalls to commodity producers. Here's a chart. These are the big 4. Copper, nickel, cobalt, and lithium. Look at the demand net zero emission scenarios that they are projecting in all of these metals. And I don't know if cobalt and lithium can even produce this amount. I don't think copper can either, or even nickel. When looking at the market balances, copper, nickel, cobalt, and lithium, I think, go into deficits, which means that they're going to try to use more of the materials than they have in production or flowing through production of these in a few years. So it's very close for these metals to, I think, skyrocket. Now, what's dangerous here is a lot of countries are banking on this to happen. They've cut the investment towards oil. They're blocking oil. They are doing a lot of things to slow the production or stop the production of oil. If they can't ramp this up, what's going to happen? Oil is the number 1 commodity. It's used everywhere. I mean, it's used far more than these. If they have problems, if everyone's banking on this transition and the transition doesn't work, what alternative do we have? Are we going to just not have oil? I mean, if they can't ramp renewables as fast as they think they can, what happens? What if they can't build as many electric vehicles as they want? What if that can't get the penetration they want with those electric vehicles? Are they just going to sit there and we're going to pay $3 or $4 or $5 or $600 per barrel oil because we didn't put investments in it and we still have to use it? I don't know if that's where it's going to go. I don't have the crystal ball, but I can tell you, I think copper's a really good bet, because if they're going to ramp this, they don't have it. I think nickel's a really good bet. I think cobalt, it's a hit or miss, because I know that they're actively trying to replace cobalt. Nickel, I think, is used in a lot of stuff. And lithium batteries could go away. They could go hydrogen. So I'm big in the copper nickel camp. I'm very heavily invested there. So I've got another article down here. It says, will the commodity price rally last into 2022? Global economic recovery and supply chain disruptions have made commodities one of the top performing asset classes this year. Prices of metals critical to green energy rollouts could edge lower with supply improving next year. Oil prices could see lower average levels next year with a surplus expected on the market early in 2022. So it says prices of the metals critical to greener energy rollouts, that includes aluminum, copper, nickel, lithium, and cobalt, could edge lower with supply improving next year, but they are likely to remain at high levels than the long-term averages, according to ING. Tighter monetary policy and an expected stronger US dollar, combined with improved supply for most metals, are set to provide headwinds to prices. Aluminum, however, is headed into a structural deficit. You could see a tighter market and higher prices in 2022. Another strong year is in the cards in 2022, although key downside risks remain. Analysts say these risks include the biggest wildcard, how governments will continue to manage COVID, and that the property crisis has weighed on the Chinese steel sector in recent months, with global iron ore prices slumping from an all-time high reached in May this year. However, China signaled support for the property sector this month, which lifted iron ore prices. It says in the medium to long term, and that's really what I'm looking at, the energy transition makes a super cycle almost inevitable. In energy commodities, COVID developments and Chinese policies will continue to be the key drivers of prices in 2022 alongside OPEC supply management policies. Natural gas and LNG prices are set to remain at elevated levels even after the winter season in the Northern Hemisphere ends. The current energy crisis in Europe and cold winter could leave natural gas stockpiles at historically low levels in the spring, which would keep gas prices higher for most of 2022. It says, finally, coal prices will likely be supported by what could be a record year for coal demand globally, driven by China and India, despite the numerous net zero emissions pledges. The economic rebound from the pandemic is taking coal power generation to a new record high this year. With global coal demand likely hitting another new high next year, undermining net zero efforts, the International Energy Agency said in its annual coal 2021 report last week. So that's what we've got for that person's outlook. I think second half of 2022, I am curious to see what oil does. That is where I think we're going to get a big boost. I also think that oil could have a softening period here in the short term, where it goes sideways a little bit longer before heading higher. I agree with that. What I'm looking at, I'm looking for the metals, precious metals, to firm up and get moving. I do think if we get a break here to the upside, it could look a lot better. So I think 2022, the precious metals could do pretty well. Uranium looks like it's firming up. That could be a winner. I do think coal could be a very big winner. And I saw a couple of coal companies that looked like they were bottoming out. So I'm going to take a look at it. And I also think natural gas is going to remain quite strong. So I'm interested in all of those areas. I like copper a lot. I'm using Nova Royalty to play it for the most part for my speculative position. And then I've got the big diversified mining companies that gain me exposure to it. So when you're looking at companies, be careful of going too heavy into the exploration and development companies. You don't want to put all your money in all of them. Be careful because you want to capture the gains. You want your money to appreciate. And sometimes you got to scale back the risk and don't go too risky on everything. So royalty companies I like. Maybe I'll do another clip on the ones that I think are kind of lower risk that I think will return and do well. Something like a Franco-Nevada will do well, and a Wheaton Precious Metals. So I overweighted those. And then the little guys, I mean, they're more speculative. So I own them, but I don't have as much as my less risk stuff. But that's my opinion. Again, it's just my financial opinion. Please don't use it as advice. You guys got to do what you got to do, and whatever you feel comfortable doing with. Give me a thumbs up if you guys like this content. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And thank you for listening. This is Finding Value.